It's been a couple weeks. I've put a couple 100 miles on it. Was it all worth it? Hey Josh, how much you like cleaning Goldwing?
I don't know that I like it at all. But I will say, I'll tell you what, I do like the fact that when I'm done with them, they look like, you know, a brand new bike. So there is satisfaction in it. It's just that it's a lot of bike to clean, you know. It's not a quick job. It takes a long time, and these things require a lot of attention to the details. There's nooks and crannies everywhere, so this is what we got. It'll be awesome when it's done.
That's right, guys. She is on the road running. It just passed a Pennsylvania State Safety Inspection, so it is 100% legal and safe to ride on the roads in PA. And I gotta tell you, I didn't want to put a video out until I rode it a while, and I've put about almost 300 miles on this, so it's been a couple weeks since the last upload. And mainly I did that because I didn't want to run into any hiccups. I wanted to make sure that I fixed the runnability problem, and this thing starts every single time and doesn't skip a beat when you're going down the road. So we fixed the running issue. It was those ignition pickups, and now we're just going to talk about the money I have into it. Now with this series, I wanted to look at this in two different ways. The perspective of somebody who wants to work on their own stuff, so a mechanic or a mechanic in training. And I also wanted to look at this in the perspective of somebody getting this bike for free or really cheap and taking it to a shop. And ultimately we'll find out if it's worth it in both instances. So let's kind of break down the parts that were involved in this. When you get something for free, it's going to have some sort of an issue, and this was no exception. When I first got this, it would not run unless you had starting fluid. That was the only way it would run. You'd spray starting fluid inside the airbox, and the thing would run for a couple seconds, and then as soon as it ran out of that starting fluid, it would shut off. So I knew because of that it had a carburetor issue. So the first thing we did was we rebuilt the carburetors, and let me tell you, those things were disgusting. All the floats were stuck shut, so no fuel was even able to get into the float bowl. And even had it somehow gotten past those stuck floats, the inside of the float bowls looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon. I mean, they were swampy, green, and just everything was clogged on it. So we went and put an entire carburetor rebuild kit in there to solve that issue. And because this had sat so long, everything was stuck. The throttle linkage was stuck, the choke valves, they were stuck and wouldn't open. So these things not only were dirty, but they also had to soak for quite some time in carburetor cleaner just to get them to move freely and get them to a point where I could actually put a rebuild kit in it. So it didn't actually cost me any money to clean the carburetors. The only thing that I had to buy was a $25 gallon of carburetor cleaner. So that was one expense to actually clean the carburetors. And then to rebuild them, the carburetor kits I got were K&L kits, and they were $90. So it was about $25 a carburetor to get a rebuild kit for it. So if you were a mechanic doing this yourself, that job would have only set you back about $90. Had you taken it to a shop, however, because they were so dirty and disgusting, it took a lot of time to get them clean. And I have about 5, almost 6 hours into one, removing them, so taking them out of the bike and installing them in the bike. That was several hours of time. Plus it was another several hours just getting the carburetors clean to a point where I could actually put the rebuild kits in there. So had you taken this to a shop, it probably would have cost you, depends on what the shop would charge. I'm gonna base everything off of a winter rate because that's when I got this done. And when you go to a shop in the wintertime, sometimes they're willing to give you a break. So I'm going to base everything off of like a $50 an hour rate, which I know probably sounds cheap in this day and age, but it's kind of what I would charge almost if I were doing this out of my house. I'd charge about $50 an hour in the off season. So 5 times 50, so you're going to get 250 bucks. Or somewhere in there. So 250 plus the $90 in the carburetor rebuild kit. So you're at about almost $350 just in rebuilding the carburetors. Now, if you watched that, you saw that I rebuilt those carburetors, and then the bike would run, and then it would shut off. It would run for a while, and then it would shut off. Here, what I found is the ignition system was giving us issues. Now, the shutting off and stalling, that one actually stumped me for quite some time because I couldn't get it to a point where it was measurable enough to read it with a peak voltage tester, which is how I picked up that those pulse generators were bad. And if you watch the build series at all, you know that that one fought me for quite some time trying to properly diagnose that, because it was either those or it would have been the CDI box, both of which are pretty expensive and pretty expensive to take a guess on. I have to put this up because apparently there's a tornado today or something. The wind is killing me. But anyway, so I found out that the pulse generators were bad, and in order to get to the pulse generators, you have to take off pretty much the whole front of this bike. So all these plastics, the radiator had to come off, these covers had to come off, all of that needed removed just to gain access to look at the pulse generators. Now, while I was in there, I noticed that the timing belts also needed replaced, which, you know, was a couple extra dollars, but the time it takes to get to that stuff, it was well worth it just to throw a new set of timing belts on. Now, those together, the pulse generators were about $95, timing belts were about $50, so another $140 went into this bike. Now I don't have to worry about the timing belts, and I don't have to worry about those pulse generators for a long, long time. Pretty much probably the rest of the time I own this bike. I mean, even if I plan on riding this a lot of miles, that stuff should stay good for a long time. But to do that job was only, for me, $140, $145 roughly to do that job. If you were to take it to a shop, again, it probably would be roughly 3 to 4 hours to do a job like that. So you could be looking at another $200. So about $395 or $345 would be your total if you were to take that into a shop. So account that with the already $300+ bill for the carburetors, add another additional $300+ bill for that. So, you know, we're adding up pretty quickly here. But I assure you that that was pretty much the most expensive part of this job. And I got those out of the way right away because the rest of the stuff was not as expensive, but kind of just as important. So that solved the runnability problem. Now the bike starts and runs. It runs strong. It doesn't shut off anymore. And I have 100% faith in riding this thing, you know, now that I fixed those issues. On to the next issue I came across. All right, so the next issue I had is the brakes on the bike. The pads on at least the front left and the rear were completely gone. They were worn out. And the reason they were gone is because they were sticking really badly. At least on the front, they were hanging up to the point where as soon as you applied the brakes, this front wheel all but locked up. It made it very difficult to push, and it was just unrideable in that condition. So the brakes needed to come apart. At least the calipers did. They needed to come apart, be cleaned up, a fresh rebuild kit installed in them, and new brake pads for at least the left side caliper. The right side, I believe, was still fine, or I could have that completely wrong. Let me look real quick. No, I think it was the left side that had the issue with brake pads. But those were rebuilt, and new brake pads installed, and now the brakes work flawlessly. But of course, it is time, it is money. So the caliper rebuild kits, they came out to 95 bucks for the pair, and the brake pads came out to 60 bucks. Now the rebuilds were a pain. The right caliper was a little bit easier to take apart than the left, but they still were a pain to take apart and clean because these things have not been taken apart, or had not been taken apart, for a very long time, and I suspect that they have been seized for a very long time as well, because I almost destroyed the caliper taking the left side apart, and it was seized tight. So it absolutely needed done, and it was a time-consuming job to do that, to say the least. Be another probably 3 hours just to rebuild those brakes, and it was because they were so stuck. Now they roll as smooth as butter. I mean, these brakes are beautiful now. They work well, and they don't stick at all. So the brakes were rebuilt, but it did set us back. So I had another 3 hours to the bill. So another 150 bucks plus the almost $160 in parts. So you see, we're starting to add up pretty good here. But that got the bike going and down the road. Now the rest of the stuff I did to it was an air filter for $15, spark plugs for $12, and then I did replace the tires. Now let's take a second and talk about those tires. All right, so everything else up until this point was actually needed. So it needed brakes because they were down below the limit, they were hanging up. It needed the ignition stuff replaced because it didn't want to stay running, and obviously the carburation because that prevented it from running at all. So it needed all those things to actually work. The tires, on the other hand, it didn't necessarily need them. Like if you look at the tire here, I don't know how it's going to pick it up on camera. That tread is still really good. So the tire itself, as far as tread is concerned, wasn't too bad. The problem I had with this tire is I had known for a fact that this had sat for a long time, and if you look, this tire's actually, if you know how to read a tire, this tire was built the 37th week of 2011. So that would make that tire 10 years old. So a 10-year-old tire on this motorcycle, to me, that's a little bit too old. It wasn't dry rotted. Like this tire still would pass the state inspection because there's no cracks in it. It's not dry rotted horribly. It's still actually a pretty decent tire. I think the bike was stored inside during the time it sat. I know it was stored inside here in my garage. My garage isn't the most airtight garage or watertight garage, so better safe than sorry was kind of my motto on that. And I just ended up throwing a new set of tires on there. It did set me back about 200 bucks. Now, that was just for the tires. And if you were to get this done, this bike is a pain in the butt to replace the rear tire. So that probably would have set you back another 3 hours or so. I'd say about almost 2 hours on a rear tire change for this Goldwing. I know some people can do it in less time. I'm just trying to be realistic with you. I know how long it took me. It took me almost 2 hours just to change that rear tire. That's everything that I had into it. I did also put a battery in there, and the battery was quite expensive, but I wanted to get a good durable battery, so I opted to spend a little extra money. Battery was about $150 or so add another $150 to everything, and that is everything it needed to get done. So let's actually talk about what I have into it, and we'll see if ultimately it was worth it in the end. Alrighty, so it is a little bit later in the day. It was sunny and now it's dark, so it's a little later on. But was it all worth it in the end? And here's kind of the summary of the whole series. This is the final video here, and really ultimately we're going to find out if I should have just bought a bike that already ran. Now from a mechanic standpoint, this bike was free, and I only have about $1,000 into it total. That's parts and making it legal basically inspection, registering it, and transferring the title. Set me back about $250. Parts were $750. So right about $1,000 I have invested into it. I got this thing appraised over at Haldeman Auto. If you don't know about them, you should. Their YouTube channel is called CycleHunters. Well, not CycleHunters.com, but their YouTube channel is Cycle Hunters. The website is CycleHunters.com. Josh, who you saw in the beginning of the video, who did an excellent detail job on this, he's in charge of the channel over there. So head on over there after this video if you'd like. But when I was over there, which is where I also work, my boss Phil gave this thing an appraisal of about $3,400 is what he said he would put it out on his lot for sale. He wasn't saying that that's what he would get for it, but he was saying that $3,400, he wouldn't feel bad putting it out there for that. Knowing the work that went into it and knowing the value of the bike, that's what he came up with. So, since I only have $1,000 into it and it's worth $3,400, I'd say that monetarily it's worth it, big time. It's a Goldwing, so riding this thing is an absolute dream, and that makes it worth it. So it's a low investment, and it's fun to ride. So yes, that makes it worth it. If I need to, I could probably sell it for some quick cash and still make some money on it. You know, I wouldn't be amiss to sell it for somewhere in the $2,000 range, honestly, if I absolutely had to. But the way this thing rides and the way this thing feels, I think I'm going to be riding this one for a while, at least to and from work. If I want to have fun, I have the ZX14 to ride, but just as a daily commuter or on a long weekend trip, this would be the bike that I would go to. And the fact that we fixed it and it has no more runnability problems, I wouldn't put 500 miles past this thing. I'd take this thing on a long trip. So absolutely, from a mechanic standpoint, this was worth it. Now here's where it gets dicey. It was only 50% worth it if you're going to do this where you get the bike for free and take it to a shop. Now there's a couple reasons why I only can give it a 50% worth it for that. Reason number one, shop fees. How much a shop charges for labor an hour. I have a good 15 to 17 hours into this bike, and I know that at 15 hours at hour rate, which is $78 an hour, I know for a fact that that's $1,200. Now I know what you're thinking. I only had about $1,000 into it, another $1,200. Still we're well below the $3,400 mark. Right, but that's what my shop charges labor. Most shops that I've looked at and looked into surrounding areas, they charge about $100 an hour. So you might want to add a little bit more to that bill. So, you know, as these labor rates go up, this becomes less and less worth it to dump all that money into it. When you consider the fact that at $2,200, let's say that you took it to our shop, I fixed it for you, or we fixed it for you, detailed it out, and your bill was, we'll say out the door, $2,400. Yes, it's valued at $3,400, but it probably could have bought about the same bike for the same money if you were good at bargaining. Like I said, I probably would part ways with this for in the $2,000 range if somebody was really excited about owning this and really wanted it, and I wanted to get rid of it at that time. Yeah, sure, I probably would sell it in the $2,000 range so you could get this bike that I did all that work to, and all you'd have to do is get the key and go ride it. So labor times can be one of the reasons that this isn't worth it. Now the other reason that this wouldn't be worth it is if there were hidden issues. I got lucky with this thing. I'm going to be 100% honest with you. The fact that this only needed a couple cheap, relatively speaking, items to fix it. I mean, I got away with a little bit here on this one. The fact that it only needed those ignition pickups and it only needed a carb clean to get running was that was awesome. I mean, that was lucky. Let's just say. I mean, there's a ton of things that can go wrong with these. Charging system issues, transmission issues. I could have had an engine issue. The fact that it was knocking and making that horrible noise when it was cranking over, that could have been something detrimental in the engine, and that would have way blown the budget. So I'm not going to say that because I got a great deal on this, that 100% of the time you should jump on a free motorcycle every time. Only if you're willing to accept the fact that it could go terribly wrong, and hopefully you're able to cut your losses before it goes terribly wrong. The reason I put this video together is because I've already had that happen. I've had customers come in, and before you know it, we're 15, 20 hours into a bill getting this bike roadworthy, and the bike they were on, unfortunately, just wasn't worth what we had labor into it. Now this one, luckily, I didn't have that much into it, and this one we did make out on top, and that's why I can say that, yeah, 50%, it was worth it. I can't go a full 100% because it brings me to the last point of it being an older motorcycle. Most shops won't even touch a motorcycle if it's 20 years and older. It's just because they don't want to deal with having to find parts. They don't want to deal with it sitting around the shop. And, you know, there's not a lot of technicians that can work on them. I mean, there's not a lot of technicians that even want to tackle working on carburetors anymore. I mean, this is ancient technology. Almost all motorcycles coming out are fuel injected. So the fact is, most shops, heck, even most schools aren't even teaching the fundamentals of how to work on a carburetor. So, you know, getting this for free, you might not even be able to find a shop that would work on it. And if that's the case, then either you got to do it yourself, or you got to find somebody that you know and trust, and maybe they don't have any type of warranty that a shop would offer. So I'd say buyer beware if you're not going to try and tackle this job yourself. If you are going to tackle this job yourself, I'd say almost 100% of the time, this is absolutely worth it. If it's something that you're going to buy or get for free or relatively cheap, I'd say proceed with caution, and maybe you make out, maybe you don't. So it's a little wishy-washy on the buying it and taking it somewhere to get fixed, but it's only because of the age. It's only because there's just a lot of unknown. This didn't start, so it could have gone south because of the fact that it didn't start. There could have been way more wrong with it than just the simple stuff I fixed. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope this series was helpful in kind of taking you through the process, guys, of what it takes, and you know, ultimately helping you make a decision on potentially that project bike out there. But that's going to do it for this video, and that's going to end the series on this bike here. For this bike here in particular, this Goldwing, and what I did to it and what needed done to it, this Goldwing here was worth it for the mechanic, and it was actually in fact worth it if you would have taken it into a shop. So this particular bike was worth it for the money. But again, thank you so much, guys, for watching the channel. If you like the videos, as always, give them a thumbs up. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed to the channel. If you want to see more like this, just let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you think. I know some of you have Goldwings out there that have been watching this. You know, let me know what some of the problems you've run into on your bikes are. I'd love to hear from you guys. But we'll see you in the next video.